and a warm welcome to the latest edition of Conversations in Drug Development, brought to you by the team at Boyds. This podcast is for our fellow community of scientists and clinicians working in the wonderful world of cell and gene therapy and drug development. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Hello and welcome to this latest instalment of Conversations in Drug Development. I'm Katherine Bowen, Chief Regulatory Officer at Boyds, and I'm going to be your podcast host for today after quite a long time away, actually. It's lovely to be back. And I am delighted to be joined today by Celine, whose surname I can't pronounce, so I'm going to get her to do it to make sure that it's right. Hello, Celine.
Hello, Katherine. Celine Cortecaine, and I'm Senior Manager in Regulatory Affairs here at Boyds. And hello to everyone.
Brilliant. Lovely to have you, Celine. And we have Celine here today because we are talking about a topic in which she is our main expert, and that is live biotherapeutic products, a really interesting and rapidly developing and emerging area that we've been pulled into more and more actually over the past few years. But I think perhaps before we talk too much about the details and the regulatory frameworks, can we maybe start off by just explaining to our listeners who may not know exactly what we mean when we're talking about live biotherapeutic products?
Yes, exactly. So maybe we should just take a step back before diving into live biotherapeutic products, or LBP as we will call them.
Oh, I do like an acronym.
Yes, there are lots of acronyms
Good.
usual in regulatory. But maybe we should start to talk about probiotics in general, because LBPs are actually an extension of probiotics. So mainly probiotics are usually food supplements, and they're intended to maintain and enhance an healthy state in healthy people. And probiotics are live microorganisms which confer health benefits. And again, usually in the form of food supplements. For the purpose of this podcast today, we will talk mainly of the digestive system and the regulation of health in the digestive system, because probiotics could be used for other organs in the body. But let's focus on the digestive system today.
Okay.
Live biotherapeutics products are probiotics, but they're really much intended to be medicinal products and not just food supplements. So the difference is it's really in the intention and the design of the product. Probiotics are designed more to sustain an healthy state, while LBPs would really be designed to cure or prevent disease in unhealthy people. This term of LBP was introduced by the FDA in 2010, really to distinguish between a food product or a food supplement.
Oh, do you know what? I hadn't realised that.
A medicinal
product. Yeah. Okay. Well, and it's such an important distinction, isn't it?
It is.
We're not talking about the little yogurt pot drinks that you can buy in Tesco's.
It's exactly that. And mind you, I think the food industry has tried since several years to bridge this barrier between food product and medicinal product without success so far.
Okay. All right. So perhaps we can have a bit of a history lesson. So we know that this was a term that was coined by the FDA back in 2010, but it's not as if this is really a new thing, really, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, microorganisms obviously have been cohabiting with the human body for millions of years. Well, since our bodies, really. And they have the evolution of the microorganism have co-evolved with human bodies, and they do affect our guts and our bodies, our whole bodies in our everyday life and in our health. Let's hope that mostly they're beneficial to us, but sometimes things can go wrong and they become pathogens as well. And actually trying to influence this microbiomes, all those microorganisms and many bacteria living with us, humans have tried to influence this microbiome without even knowing the existence of the microbiome. But this has happened since antiquity and since a very long time. There have been the use of fermented foods. So fermentation was first probably used as preserving food, but fermentation obviously introduced yeast and bacteria in the food, and those yeast and bacteria usually have also an action on our microbiome in the gut and the health of our microbiome and the balance of our microbiome. So this influence of the microbiome has been present for millennia now, and it's not just byproduct of food preservation. People were conscious of influencing or having some benefits on the digestion and the health in general. There are records in ancient Rome of people being given specific diets to get better. And also there are records in China, like in the 4th century, that doctor or a physician that was giving a fecal suspension to patients to treat diarrhea or food poisoning.
I hope they patented it. Presumably not.
So it was like a precursor of fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT. And again, it was done as a medical practice. So they knew they were influencing something, even if they didn't know the presence of bacteria.
And that's the thing, they had no idea, presumably, what the reason was why that works, but they knew that it did.
Yeah.
Things have presumably moved on. Well, I don't know, maybe they haven't moved on that much. Things have presumably moved on at least slightly since then. So where are we now? What's happened over the last period of time? So, presumably not everything since the 4th century.
So now there are quite a lot of modern probiotics now being developed. And obviously we know about the microbiome, we know about bacteria and other microorganisms being present in the gut. So what has changed from the 4th century is that now we're trying to give purified products like purified bacteria to have an idea of which strains of bacteria or yeast we're dealing with. And we're also trying to control the dose being given. But again, it's still fairly recent. Until now, everything was in the food supplement. Things were less controlled than we're trying now for LBPs. Obviously, we need more control and more description and more understanding of the mechanism of action as before.
It's treated as a medicine.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, so obviously now probiotics are becoming a big thing, and there is a huge market with a real interest now for everything with the diet, trying to influence the health through diet. So it's getting, over the past decades, the market and the interest for probiotics is increased a lot.
But at the same time as that, so the probiotics, we're talking about that health market. These aren't things that have to be regulated as medicinal products. Correct or not correct? Is there a complication there, Celine?
Yeah, so again, so far, all probiotics, on the markets, food supplements, at least in Europe, there is no probiotics or no LBP on the market as a medicinal product. So EMA has been very strict. And also, as we mentioned, companies are trying to bridge that gap between food supplement and medicinal product. It's been proven very difficult for them to do so.
Because the moment you start moving into making those really specific claims around actually treating or preventing a disease, you are deep down in the weeds of all of the medicinal product requirements.
Exactly. And as you said, as soon as you claim for your product to be a medicinal product, you must demonstrate positive benefit-risk balance. You must produce data, efficacy and safety data, and you must understand the mechanism of action. Also, there are difficulties in manufacturing the product and standardization of the product, because mainly for the moment, those products not always grown in incubators. There's some probiotics like fecal microbiota or FMTs. They're still prepared from donors. And then there is also variability of different donors, or even with the same donor. And also when the recipient of the product, they have their own microbiome as well, which influence the product that they receive. And again, there's a huge variability between patients, and all that for the moment has made difficult the production of consistent data.
So that is a relatively high level view. Should we talk a bit more about the specifics of the regulatory frameworks that we're really operating under? So we talked a little bit there about the food part of this, the probiotics. So in the EU, that's going to be regulated under general food law. So I guess that's the European Food Safety Authority. We know that it's been a really tricky environment to get the EMA on board about this. And I think we can talk a little bit more about that as we go through the podcast. What about in the US? What's the framework there? Where are we sitting?
So in the US, it seems the FDA is a bit more open to the idea of LBPs. Well, they coined the name to start with.
I mean, this was their terminology. Yep.
Exactly. And they've actually issued quite a lot of guidance about developing LBPs, and also about certain disease which are targeted by LBPs. And the main one is Clostridium difficile infection, or CDI, which is the main indication targeted with fecal microbiota transplantation, FMT. And actually, the FDA released a new guidance about clinical trial for CDI last week. So yes, so they're very much trying to be on board and try to guide developers with LBPs and those diseases. However, they also actually, the FDA has authorized 2 products to LBP so far, which are not authorized in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's both of those products are FMTs or derivation of FMTs. One is very much still an FMT. It's just, again, from donors, always from donors, so nothing grown in the lab yet. Purification of fecal matter. And one biota is still an FMT given rectally to the patient to try to prevent recurrence of CDI. And the other is a bit more structured, where the donor product is more purified and only the spores of the bacteria are kept and encapsulated for a novel formulation. So you can see
So
the
kind of
progression.
FMT plus. It's sort of gradually progressing.
Exactly. And it's what LBPs are trying to become. More manufacture, like FMT plus, exactly. More manufacture, more purified, more specific with specific strains. So the next step will be to grow the strains, so identify the strains we want to keep, and not just take the whole of the microflora from a donor, but identify specific strains, grow them in the lab, and encapsulate them. And then we will work towards more understanding, more knowledge of exactly what's in the capsule. Because for the moment, we just take the microbiome of a person and put it in a capsule, basically, which works. FMT does work, but there's always this safety risk of unknown or unidentified pathogens being actually given to a patient who already is compromised with a compromised gut system and a compromised immunity. So there's always a risk of transmitting an infection or a disease. While with the next step of growing the bacteria in the lab, we will bypass this risk.
Okay.
So yes, coming back to your question, sorry, where the FDA is at. So FDA has approved those 2 products, but otherwise, apart of those 2 products, everything is still considered as a food supplement in the US as well. So they're a bit more advanced than Europe, or that's the EMA. but it's still early stage.
And that's a really important distinction, isn't it, at the EMA, because it does feel a bit as if some of the local agencies are starting to change their stance on this slightly.
Exactly. So the EMA as a centralized organization has not yet opened the door to probiotic product, as we said. However, this view from CMA has been increasingly considered as too restrictive by member states. And some of the member states are now starting to authorize probiotics on the national market, which is creating a distinct barrier between the national regulations and the centralized EMA regulation.
So what needs to change at the EMA level in particular, do you think, to start to really encourage the development of these products?
Well, I think it's recognized that centralized guidances, at least, if not regulation, should be produced by the EMA at some point. There was, in 2022, there was a horizon scanning report which was published, which did highlight the need for new regulatory approaches in that field of LBPs. However, since then, nothing has been published. So it's still in the domain of wishful thinking.
Although we know from experience, don't we, that with new developing technologies, often there'll be a few of those people who are really pushing the boundaries and are going and speaking to the agency, and that they often use the basis of those conversations to start to frame their discussions. So we do quite often see, as emerging technologies come through, that there is a lag, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of thought going in behind the scenes about what they do want to see and how to help, and where they can flex within their own regulatory boundaries, if you like.
Indeed. And so there will exactly be a push from the developers, but it might be also a push coming from the actual member states, because it seems as they're willing, for the moment individually at national level, to introduce those products. And they've been helped actually by the recent European regulation for substance of human origin, like SOO, which does regulate the provision of human material and put boundaries to protect donors and recipients, and to include traceability of the product from donors to recipient. And FMTs are now included into this regulation. So at least it's the introduction of something it's still at national level, because this regulation is at national level. Member states are responsible for those products, but at least it's a start where in Europe there is some regulation being put in place and some protection on traceability from donor to recipient, which is introduced. You need to consider that, as we just talked about LBPs being an extension of FMTs, that the FMTs, a product from donors, fall under the SOO regulation, and so are regulated by member states. But as soon as this product is manufactured further, purified further, or the extra step, they will fall under the medicinal product regulation under the centralization of EMA. So a product maybe like wost, which is spores from bacteria, will really be bridging those two regulations, starting as a SOO product and finishing as a medicinal product under the medicinal product regulation, with the isolation of spore and encapsulation. So we see the emergence of complex product falling at different step of the
could fall at any
manufacturing.
stage along that, with the purely manufactured LBPs very much being on this is entirely a medicinal product and comes with all of that complication as well. Because if you've got, presumably these aren't products with one strain sitting in them, right?
Exactly. So that's the next step, with the evolution of LBPs being completely manufactured in lab, in a way, they will fall completely into the medicinal product regulation and not have the human origin product start than some of those products I'd say they could have. So again, it's very much all those products. I think the discussion which must be had with the regulators is very much on a case-by-case basis, because as we see, each product is very different. Origins of products are different. Manufacturing are different. So again, for producers and maybe for regulators as well, it's very difficult for the moment to have a one-fit-all regulation or guidances, because the discussion must be very much on a case-by-case basis.
And that's right, isn't it? Because if we think about that spectrum that we've just talked about, at different points along that, you've got different risks that you need to be worrying about, and potentially a different benefit risk profile overall as well. So it does make sense that they're regulated in different ways with a somewhat different discussion around them, although that perhaps to some extent doesn't necessarily help the developers.
Yeah, exactly. And it might be as a point of the EMA for the moment, which hasn't produced any general guidance, because they saw that there were a lot of variability between products. But as you said, it creates a vacuum for the developers on how to develop their product and which data to produce.
So I think we've talked about a lot of different elements here. I'm just thinking, if we're thinking specifically about LBPs here, what would your summary be of the main challenges that we're seeing from a regulatory perspective?
Yes. So LBPs obviously present a unique challenge due to the nature of the product, and they differ from those challenges faced by conventional drugs, because they're absolutely not conventional drugs. So the first challenge is a demonstration of clinical efficacy, because as we said, there's a lot of variability already with the products if they're manufactured from donors, but also variability with the recipient and the recipient microbiome, and how the recipient microbiome will react when receiving the product. So consistent efficacy data are difficult to produce. And then the next challenge is pinpointing the exact mechanism of action, because of two things. First, quite often those LBPs are not a single strain of bacteria, but a combination of tens, if not thousands of strains, because all those bacteria strains work in synergy in the gut. So usually to create a wanted effect, you need to get some kind of complex population in your microbiome or in your pill. So first, how do you describe the mechanism of action? Do you isolate? Should the bacteria be isolated by strain, and the mechanism of action by being demonstrated by each strain, or as a population as a whole? And again, sometimes we don't know what they're doing in the gut, so we don't know the extent of their role in the gut. So it's quite difficult to pinpoint and again put on paper what's the exact mechanism and action.
So what this makes me think a little bit of the challenges we have with secretomes as well. When you take cells and collect all the stuff that's around them, is figuring out which bits you need and which bits you don't.
Exactly. And the other difficulty is that non-clinical studies are difficult or not relevant, because animals don't have the same microbiome. So again, it's difficult to get significant results in animal before giving the product to people.
But presumably with that, probably no real need for tox studies if you're using elements of an existing microbiome. Or is that still something of a subject of debate?
It is, because...
And listeners, we've just gone off script, by the way.
But toxicity is an issue, again, because different factors. First, the product will stay in the gut, and the product will develop temporarily in the gut. So, first, the efficacy and the potency will be dependent of how much your LBP will be able to flourish in the gut. And again, this will be different from people to people, probably. And then the toxicity as well will depend of which strain will develop or interact. And it might be dependent of the dose you're given, but it might not, because the product will still be alive for a few days, a few weeks.
Almost impossible to test in an animal.
No, it's not. So again, how do you define the toxicity? And again, how do you get consistent results? It's quite challenging.
But presumably, in everything you've talked about there, we're talking about toxicity, potential toxicity and risks at the level of the gut. Do these in any way ever go into the systemic circulation? Is there more of a systemic risk, or does it tend to be really very much related to the dosage?
So they should not be systemic risk, as the product itself will not reach the systemic circulation, or it should not. It will only if the lining of the gut was very compromised, which should not happen. So yes, there is no standard PK data as we know them, because the product will stay in the gut and again will stay alive in the gut for a few days or a few weeks, but there should not be systemic toxicity.
So this is going to be a very, very different package of data and clinical trial design potentially that lands on a regulator's desk when they're reviewing a clinical trial application for an LBP.
Exactly. And the definition of the endpoints of the studies are to be considered very carefully, because they cannot be the same as we know them for a small molecule or even for gene therapy. They're really a new sort of product with not much experience so far.
So we've focused this conversation very much on the gut, and I know we said at the front that's where LBPs are tending to be, but there's a huge body of research now, isn't there, on the influence of the microbiome on, well, as far as I can tell, everything from the literature. So where do you think this could go? Where else is a point of research in terms of understanding the impact of the gut and bacteria in the guts on the rest of the way that the body works?
Yeah, you're right, Katherine. There's a lot of research on the influence of the microbiome in the whole health or the whole body mechanism. So obviously, the microbiome has a lot of influence on the digestion, but by extension, on the absorption of any ingested product, which can be another medicine. And so depending on the state of the microbiome and depending of the state of the gut lining, any medicine will be absorbed at different level and could be absorbed more or less depending of all this environment. So the microbiome is now considered as a co-medicine to influence the ingestion of other medicine. And it's true with oncology product. People are doing some research about how some oncology product could be better absorbed by the body by modifying the microbiome. Another big area of study is the influence of the microbiome on the immune system, because the gut is really the junction between the external world and the body, and it's also bacteria in the microbiome plays a role of antigen presentation to the immune system and the immune system cells which are present in the gut lining. So we know now that also bacteria, either the common the usual bacteria in the guts or external bacteria, are interacting with the immune cells and do have an influence on the training of the immune system and by extension on the innate and adaptive immunity of a person. So again, there is a lot of research now on how exactly the microbiome could or do influence the immune system and the immunity of a person.
There is so much potential into the future, isn't there, as we start to understand how all of these systems operate together and how they can be targeted. So very exciting. So with that thought, what does the future look like? And we do like to get our crystal balls out on this podcast, Celine. So from your perspective, what do we already know about the future of the regulation of these products, and what don't we know yet that would be really great to know, so we know the direction that these are heading in?
Yeah, so as we discussed before, the future of LBPs are probably working with predefined strain grown in incubators to bypass the donor step and the uncertainty of the material from human origin. Regulatory-wise, it can be hoped that the regulators, there will be more discussion as the products are being developed. The developer will have in-depth discussion with the regulators about exactly what they need to fulfill all the obligation of a medicinal product, and how to demonstrate efficacy, the risk-benefit balance, which should be the endpoints of clinical trial, how clinical trial should be run. So all this discussion must be go ahead between the developers and the regulators, really. And hopefully from trailblazer companies and those discussions, early discussions, eventually some guidance will emerge to try to have more consistencies for the development of these products.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Celine. I've been trying to get you to do this podcast for a while. It has been absolutely fascinating, and I hope that now you will come back and do another one in the future and continue to keep us updated on this really, really interesting and I think potentially very impactful development in the industry. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Conversations in Drug Development, the podcast series brought to you by the team at Boyds. Don't forget to follow us on the usual podcast platforms or visit our website to ensure you don't miss out on any of our future episodes.